ever catch yourself like actually thinking about the types of fats you're eating? We hear all this stuff about good fats, bad fats, saturated, unsaturated, everyone going crazy for omega-3s these days. But what about the fats that are kind of just dot everywhere?
Yeah, the ones we don't even really think about.
Right, exactly. And today we're going deep on some really cool brand new science that's found a link, and this is surprising, between one of these super common dietary fats and a really tough type of breast cancer to deal with.
Definitely a connection I wasn't really expecting. This is a preclinical study, just came out in Science, done by some researchers over at Weill Cornell Medicine, and it's giving us a whole new way of looking at how linoleic acid, which is a very, very common dietary fat, might be connected to triple-negative breast cancer and how it grows.
So we're doing a total deep dive today to figure out exactly what this study is all about. Like, what did they actually find, and what could it mean for, well, anyone really, but how we all think about our diets when it comes to this specific type of cancer risk. And we're really going to zoom in on triple-negative breast cancer and this dietary factor, linoleic acid, which we'll see is like kind of lurking in a lot of the seed oils that we use every day.
For sure. Let's get into it. So basically what they found is that linoleic acid seems to be like feeding the growth of triple-negative breast cancer cells. And the really interesting thing here is that the researchers were able to show that it does this by turning on a very particular protein pathway inside these cells.
Okay, so hold on a sec. Linoleic acid, that's an omega-6. Right. An omega-6 fatty acid.
You got it. An omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acid, to be exact. And you find it in a bunch of seed oils like soybean oil, safflower oil, things like that. And I mean, let's be real, those are in tons of processed foods, all kinds of cooking oils. They're everywhere. The study also mentions that it's in some animal products too, pork, eggs, that kind of thing. But if you're eating like a typical Western diet, most likely the seed oils are the main source of it. It's important to remember this is preclinical work though. So most of it is based on, lab experiments with cells and stuff, and animal models. Haven't gotten to humans yet.
Oh, got it. So they saw this connection, but how does the linoleic acid actually make the cancer cells grow? Like, what's happening step by step?
This is where it gets really, really cool. So there's this protein inside the tumor cells, and it's called FABP5. And what they found is that linoleic acid actually attaches itself to this FABP5. You can kind of think of FABP5 like a docking station. And linoleic acid is like a very specific key that fits into it. And when that key goes in, boom, it sets up this whole chain reaction, and it activates something called the mTORC1 pathway. That's like the cell's like control center for growth.
So linoleic acid basically flips the on switch for this control center in the cancer cells. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. You got it. And there's another really important detail here, which is how specific this whole thing seems to be. Like this activation of mTORC1 by linoleic acid through this FABP5 protein, it's way more noticeable in triple-negative breast cancer cells than in other types of breast cancer that are sensitive to hormones. They actually found that triple-negative cells have a way higher amount of that FABP5 docking station to begin with.
So what you're saying is the same fat could have totally different effects depending on what kind of breast cancer we're talking about. Oh.
Exactly. And to look into this even more, they used a mouse model of triple-negative breast cancer. And what they saw was that when they fed these mice food that was high in linoleic acid, their tumors grew much faster. So that's really important because it means that what they saw in the lab in cells is actually happening in a living animal too. Makes the link even stronger, right?
Definitely. And it kind of makes you think about like the whole Western diet thing, doesn't it? Like how we eat has changed a lot over time.
Right. And the authors of the study actually talked about that too. They point out that since I think it was the 1950s, people have been eating way more seed oils, fried foods, processed foods, it's everywhere. And that means we're eating a lot more omega-6s in general, and especially linoleic acid. So naturally, that makes people wonder, is that connected to why we're seeing more of certain diseases, like breast cancer, for example?
So have there been other studies that have looked into this?
Yeah, for sure. But like this study points out, the results have been kind of all over the place, not very clear. And the really important thing is no one's been able to show like the step-by-step process of how omega-6 fatty acids could actually lead to cancer. The study is big because it actually shows that it shows the how and the why.
That's a great point. So how did these researchers figure this out when no one else could? What did they do differently?
Well, they decided to focus on this mTORC1 pathway, because we already know that that pathway is really important for how cells sense nutrients and then use those nutrients to grow. And since linoleic acid is a nutrient, it made sense to look at whether it was affecting that pathway. And as we were talking about before, their main finding was that, yeah, linoleic acid does activate mTORC1, but mainly in triple-negative breast cancer. That's what they saw in the lab, at least.
Okay, so you keep saying triple negative, but for someone who's maybe not super familiar with all this, could you break down what that actually means? Like, what makes it so different, and why is this whole linoleic acid thing so important specifically for that type of cancer?
Oh, yeah, totally. So triple negative is a type of breast cancer where the tumor cells, they don't have three specific receptors that you normally find in other breast cancers. These receptors are for estrogen, progesterone, and a protein called HER2. And because they don't have these receptors, a lot of the drugs that are used to treat breast cancer, they don't work on triple negative. They work by attaching to those receptors. So if the receptors aren't there, the drugs can't do their job. That's why triple negative is harder to treat. So finding a new way to target it, like this whole linoleic acid and FABP5 thing, could be a big deal.
Makes sense. So back to this study, they saw this specific activation in triple negative cells, and the key to the whole thing is this FABP5 protein, right?
Yep, exactly. So they found that in triple-negative breast cancer cells, linoleic acid kind of latches on to FABP5, and they form a complex. And this complex, it's like the missing piece that lets the mTORC1 machinery assemble and turn on. Like it gives the control center everything it needs to go full speed ahead. And that makes the cells metabolize faster and grow faster. It seems like that very specific interaction, that's at the heart of what they found for this specific kind of breast cancer.
So it's not just that linoleic acid is there, it's how it interacts with FABP5 that's important, like it's sending a signal to the cell to grow.
Exactly, you nailed it. And they didn't just stop there. Remember those mice with triple-negative breast cancer? When they fed them a diet high in linoleic acid, not only did their tumors grow faster, but they also found that the levels of FABP5 went up in the tumors, and so did the activation of mTORC1, like a chain reaction.
Wow, so that's pretty solid evidence. And in a living animal, too. Did they look at any human patients to see if they saw the same thing?
They did. They looked at tumor samples and blood samples from women who were recently diagnosed with triple-negative breast cancer, and what they found was a connection. The patients who had higher levels of FABP5 and linoleic acid in their tumors and their blood, they also had this pathway, this whole process we've been talking about, more active in their bodies.
So basically, this study shows us, in a much more detailed and specific way, how something we eat every day, this linoleic acid that's in so many seed oils, can actually affect how this type of cancer develops and grows.
Absolutely. And it's not just some vague connection. They actually found a specific molecular mechanism that explains it. And figuring out how important FABP5 is, that could be huge for figuring out how to treat this cancer.
In what way? You said earlier that it could be a biomarker. What does that mean?
Yeah, so since FABP5 seems to be such a big part of all this, the researchers think that doctors could maybe measure the levels of FABP5 in a patient's tumor and use that information to give them more personalized advice about their diet. Like if someone has high levels of FABP5, maybe they should try to eat less linoleic acid, stuff like that. And even more than that, they think that maybe FABP5 itself could be a target for new drugs, drugs specifically for triple-negative breast cancer, because right now there aren't that many options for that type.
That's really interesting, like a whole new path for both diet and treatment, and just for this specific type of cancer. And they didn't just look at breast cancer, did they?
You're right, they didn't. Their main focus was definitely triple-negative breast cancer, but they did do some early research on other diseases too. And they found some early evidence that this same pathway, the whole omega-6, FAB5, mTORC1 thing, might also be involved in how some subtypes of prostate cancer grow. They even think it might play a role in other common conditions, like obesity and diabetes. But they were definitely clear that they need to do more research on those.
Okay, so if we're going to wrap this up and give our listeners the key takeaway here, it's that this study gives us a way more focused understanding of how linoleic acid, which is in a lot of seed oils, is connected to triple-negative breast cancer. And it's not just a general idea. They actually found a specific protein, FABP5, and a key growth pathway, mTORC1, that seem to be directly involved.
Exactly. And this opens up a lot of possibilities, right? We could come up with better dietary recommendations for people with this specific kind of cancer, maybe even new drugs that target FABP5.
And since seed oils are everywhere these days, and this study found this connection, plus it might even be connected to prostate cancer and other things like obesity and diabetes, it really makes you wonder, like, what does this mean for how we think about food guidelines in the future and how we prevent cancer? Definitely something to think about.
For sure. No easy answers, but it's research like this that gets us closer.